Bonjour! Aujourd'hui, nous allons en France. The wines of France are benchmarks of quality around the world. They've become the standard to which other wines are compared. And this isn't by accident or coincidence. We mentioned the noble grape varieties in Lecture 5 and 6. All of them can be found in France. Today's lecture is about the wines of Western France, in the regions of the Loire Valley and Bordeaux. Bordeaux is the most important region for wine, meaning it's the most spoken about, retains the highest price at auction, and people invest and get a higher return from it than most of the stock market. Your understanding of these wines helps you understand one end of the spectrum for French reds and whites. Powerful reds that last for decades and delicate whites. You should have the wines available for you to taste today. A Sauvignon Blanc based Loire white like Sancerre, Pouilly-Fumé, or Quincy. A Chenin Blanc based Loire white such as Vouvray, Touraine, or Savinière. A Cabernet Franc based wine from the Loire Valley such as Chinon or Bourgogne. A white Bordeaux, preferably from Graves or Pessac-Léognan. A red left bank Bordeaux wine, anything from Pauillac to Margaux to Graves. And a right bank Bordeaux, anything from Saint-Emilion, Pomerol to Blaye or Côte de Bourg. Although some people will argue that the very idea of terroir is a myth, most people believe that it's one of the secrets to France's success with wine. As mentioned in previous lectures, terroir is made up of many natural elements, everything from climate to microclimate to soil. We've talked a lot about this already, but the concept of terroir comes from France, and that makes sense because France was made for wine. About 245 million years ago, France was under shallow tropical seas. For millions of years, the tectonic plates shifted, and the area underwent turbulent geologic activity. Now, sea creatures in the area died off, and their calcium-rich shells fed what became the limestone-heavy soil of the Paris Basin. The Gallo-Romans knew the value and quality of this limestone, as they would excavate it for their monuments and buildings. It kept them cool in the summer and warm in the winter. It does something similar for grapevines. Now, there's no scientific proof that the mineral flavor you get from the wine comes from the mineral soil, but these wines from the limestone soil do have a finesse to them. Chateau is the French word for castle, and sometimes they are, but most of the time this term refers to a winemaking estate that includes the vineyards, the winery, and the cellars. We should discuss French labels, which are a wealth of information for everyone from the novice to the connoisseur, due to the strict laws governing what a label can say. Even if you remember nothing else from this course, learning how to read the details of a French label can consistently steer you to a great bottle. It's a terrific cheat sheet. One trick to reading the label for quality is to pay attention to the details about the geographical location. The more information there is about the specific region and vineyard, the higher the quality. Entry-level wines use grapes from locations throughout France. The label will say vin de table, meaning table wine. For a slightly better wine, look for vin de pays on the label. These wines use grapes from large but specified regions from all over France. The name of a particular region, such as Bordeaux, Loire, or Burgundy, on the label signals the next level of quality. The grapes must come from the specified region, called an appellation, and the label will also have the words appellation contrôlée, or appellation controlled, to show that only certain areas are designated as suitable for this label. This is the AC abbreviation that I mentioned back in Lecture 2. But labels and quality can get even more detailed. They might also name the specific commune or district where the grapes come from. For example, Sancerre in Loire. These are also called an AC or an AOC for appellation d'origine contrôlée, but they are specific appellations within a larger appellation. It's a safe bet that the wine with a specific appellation, such as Pauillac, on Bordeaux, will be very good. Let's talk about two of the most important regions, Bordeaux and Loire. We'll start with Bordeaux. There are 57 different appellations within the region of Bordeaux. I always remember that because it's the same number on the Heinz ketchup bottle. I mean, don't ask me how ketchup relates to Bordeaux, but that's at least how I remembered it. Two rivers, the Garonne to the north and the Garonne to the south, split Bordeaux into the areas we call the left bank and the right bank. Sauvignon Blanc and Semillon, the two Bordeaux white grapes, grow on the left bank, as well as in a region called Entre deux Mers, which is between these two rivers, or between the two seas. We mentioned Semillon in our last lecture when speaking about Sauternes, and indeed Sauternes is on the left bank of Bordeaux. The style of dry Bordeaux whites can be determined by whether Semillon or Sauvignon Blanc predominates. Those predominant in Semillon are those fuller in body, while those predominating in Sauvignon Blanc are a bit lighter, more aromatic, and higher in acidity. The whites of Bordeaux are often fermented and or aged in French oak, with some new French oak that lends weight, richness, and oak flavors of toast, vanilla, and spice. These methods are particularly used in the higher quality communes of Graves and Pessac-les-Oignons. Now let's taste our Pessac-les-Oignons. Now you have a Loire white in here as well, and that's Sauvignon Blanc based, and I'm going to ask you to pick that up and compare it to the Pessac-les-Oignons. You'll notice that the Pessac-les-Oignons, or white Bordeaux, is a little bit richer in color than the Loire white. This is not only because of Semillon, but this is also because of that oak fermentation and maturation. Now let's smell it. You get beautiful citrus notes, also mineral tones. But there's that beeswax kind of element you get from the Semillon, as well as the oak characteristics. Remember, vanilla, toast, and spice, and they're quite prevalent in this. And if you're having problems identify it, smell your Sancerre or your Sauvignon Blanc white from the Loire and go back to your white Bordeaux. Now let's taste it. I love these wines. You'll notice that, especially if you taste it in comparison to the Sancerre, this is much more medium-bodied, but it can get quite voluptuous depending on the ripeness of the vintage as well as the intensity of the oak. But notice this wine has a beautiful balance. And because you've got some of the Sauvignon Blanc in there, you've got the acidity, and Semillon is known to gain complexity as it ages. Now, these wines are not made every year, and sometimes in some years there's no bottling made at all. But they can age for a long time in great vintages, such as 2007, 2005, 2002, and 2000. And as they age, they get a more voluptuous body, more broad on the palate, with complexities of nuts and cream and a light toffee folded in. Yet they always keep their elegance and finesse. Now on to claret, which is the historical English word, and still used today, for the dry red wines of Bordeaux. Samuel Johnson, one of the most quoted British authors from the 1700s, once said, "He who aspires to be a serious wine drinker must drink claret. And if you want to be a serious wine connoisseur, you better know red Bordeaux." Although 14 grape varieties are permitted in Bordeaux, there are 5 grape varieties, red grape varieties, that are considered the Bordeaux varieties, a term that you may come across in your reading. The 5 are Cabernet Sauvignon, Merlot, Cabernet Franc, Petit Verdot, and Malbec. The gravelly soils of the left bank of the river favor the Cabernet Sauvignon grape, while the clay soils on the right bank favor the Merlot grape. This is why the wines of the left bank are higher in the ratio of Cabernet Sauvignon, while those on the right bank, as you might imagine, are based on Merlot. This is not a mystery, just which soil suits the grape best. Now, an easy way to remember this is to put your left hand out in front of you, and it forms an L. However, it also forms a C. This has always helped when I'm teaching in the industry. L is for left bank, and C is for Cabernet Sauvignon. So L and C. So now you'll never forget it. The terroir is so varied and specific in Bordeaux that it has multiple regions and communes within it. The left bank alone has the regions of Médoc and Haute-Médoc, as well as the high-quality communes of Saint-Estèphe, Pauillac, Saint-Juyen, Margaux, Graves. Each of these has very different wines, even though they are so close to one another. For example, Pauillac is known for being very powerful, with the most firm gripping tannins, and it's the most masculine in structure, with aromas of pencil shavings, believe it or not. On the other hand, the region of Margaux, not too far away, the wines are a bit softer and rounder in character because of having a little bit more Merlot, and are also known for an aroma of violets. Saint-Juyen, another commune, is known to be a little bit lighter than the others, with fresh acidity and a bit more angularity, which what I mean by that is being a little bit more acidic and less round in character. Now remember in Lecture 6, we discussed the firm, gripping tannins of Cabernet Sauvignon and the rounder and more plush mid-palate of Merlot. These wines benefit from oak aging because the slow oxidation in the barrel rounds the harsh edges of those tannins and harmonizes them with the other elements. In Bordeaux, you see wines with 100% new oak, sometimes 200% new oak, which in their youth can be so overpowering in their oaky character that sometimes you can't even smell the fruit. It's covered up too much by that chocolate, vanilla, and toast and spice of the oak. It takes several years before you see that beautiful cassis and blackcurrant fruit peek out. Now let's take a left bank claret. Here I have a Pauillac from Pichon Longueville-Baron, or Chateau Pichon Longueville-Baron. And notice the deep color. Remember, we talked about Cabernet Sauvignon having a really deep, rich color because of the thickness of the skins. Now, you even try to put your fingers behind it and you can't even see it. So this is pretty deep colored. Now let's smell the wine. Swirl it around to get some aromas. And off the bat, you can definitely tell this is an old world wine because you get some of that mineral character. And the black currant fruit that is you get from Cabernet Sauvignon is a little bit more pulled back. But what you also get, especially from Pauillac, is this cedar, cigar, and kind of a tobacco-like notes, as well as lead pencil shavings, which I always get. But sometimes people notice a hint of violets. Now let's taste. Notice those firm, gripping tannins. And notice in your mouth, it has a really long finish, and you'll notice how the flavors change in your mouth if you wait 10 seconds, and then 30 seconds, and then to a minute. You'll notice how the fruit will stand out, and then the other tobacco and cedar notes will come out, and then the fruit comes out again. It's this beautiful little dance. On the right bank, home of Merlot, you see the regions of Blaye, or Côte de Blaye, Côte de Bourg, Fronsac, and the high-quality regions of Saint-Emilion and Pomerol. And just because these do not predominate in Cab, don't be fooled into thinking these are wimpier wines. The wines of Pomerol can be absolute powerhouses and can be some of the most expensive wines in the world. And in a blind taste test, sometimes it's really difficult to tell the difference between the left bank and the right bank. Here, I have a Saint-Emilion from Château Trotte-Vieille. Now let's take a look at the color here. Now let's see if we can compare the color to the left bank and the right bank. So I've got the left bank in my left hand and the right bank in my right hand. The Cabernet Sauvignon is a little bit deeper. It is, so it's a little bit more opaque. And the right bank is a little bit clearer. So you can tell this has a little bit more Merlot in it. In fact, it's mostly Merlot. Smell it? Now off the bat, you get a lot of French oak, so a lot of vanilla and a lot of toast in there. And that's one of the things you get from Saint-Emilion. They're very known for that. But you do get some of that dark fruit and plum character that you know Merlot for. Now let's taste it. Now after the gripping tannins of the Pauillac, this is a bit softer. It's like coming home, a little bit plusher. But also you notice it does have some nice acidity to it, not as high as the cab that you got there from the left bank, but it has limestone soils in Saint-Emilion, which causes some of that nice elegance that you have there. But you notice the palate is a bit rounder, a bit smoother, and I wonder if you feel now that plush mid-palate. But it still has some tannin in there. It's just not as gripping as the Cabernet Sauvignon. But if you notice, even as I'm talking, it's been maybe 20 seconds and then 30 seconds, the flavor just keeps lasting on and on. These are the wines on the right bank that have seen a style movement in the last decade. They're called garage wines, or garagiste in French. We'll talk about the American version of this in Lecture 17. These wines are made in super small quantities, typical on tiny plots of land with very low-yielding vines. They're aged in new French oak, barriques, sometimes 200% new French oak, where the wines lay in new barrels for 9 months, and then in an entirely new set of new French oak barrels for another 9 or 12 months. Because the wines are Merlot-based, this process gives the wine intense amounts of concentration, richness, and velvety texture tannins. As these wines are made in such tiny quantities, some cost as much as the first growths on the left bank. Now let's take a few minutes to understand classifications, such as first growth. At the Paris Universal Exhibition in 1855, Napoleon III asked the Bordeaux Chamber of Commerce to present a list of the best wines from the best producers. The list was based on unofficial classifications within the area and on historical brokers' prices. The higher the price, the higher the classification. The 1855 classification had 5 tiers, or 5 growths. The top tier is called the first growth, or Premier Cru Classé. And this classification is recorded on the label. There are only 5 first growths, and they're the highest price of the left bank wines. They are Chateau Lafite Rothschild, Chateau Haut-Brion, Chateau Mouton Rothschild, Chateau Margaux, and Chateau Latour. The second tier is called second growth, or deuxième cru, and it includes 14 chateaux, such as Chateau Pichon Longueville-Baron, which we've tasted, and I've stayed there myself. And when I stayed there, practically the entire right wing was mine. It's gorgeous, it's a beautiful castle. Third growth, which has 14 classified chateaux. Fourth growths, which has 10 chateaux. And fifth growth has 18 chateaux. In 1932, there was a further classification for the producers not included within this very small list, and there have been other revisions since then. For example, in 2003, the following were classified as basic to highest quality within this area. You have Cru Bourgeois, Grand Cru Bourgeois, and Grand Cru Bourgeois Exceptionnel. Grave, also on the left bank, has its own classification. Its 12 chateaux are classified as Grand Cru Classé. On the right bank, Pomerol doesn't have a specific classification system, but Saint-Emilion does. The designations are divided into Saint-Emilion Grand Cru Classé and Saint-Emilion Premier Cru Classé, which is then divided into Grand Cru Classé A, Grand Cru Classé B. All of these will be noted on the label. To complicate matters further, individual Saint-Emilion producers can annually submit for inclusion. I know it sounds confusing, but you'll get used to it. The pricing and selling of Bordeaux has been open to speculation, mainly because of a system of intermediaries and brokers between the producer and the consumer, along with outside factors that cause fluctuations in price. Because of this relative instability, the Bordelais have developed a futures sale called en primeur, which is like buying futures in the stock market. This is generally reserved for the classed growths. In the spring following the vintage, while the wines are still in barrel, intermediaries can purchase wines after a tasting. Sometimes you can get wine much cheaper than what it turns out to be worth when it's released a couple of years later, in which case you can sell it for quite a profit. However, it can go the other way around. The wine might have been very hyped up at en primeur and then worth a lot less when it's finally released. If you're interested in buying Bordeaux futures, please make sure you work with a trained professional, as it can be quite risky. Here's how I think of it. There are some exceptional vintages in Bordeaux, such as 2005, 2000, 96, 1990, 85, and the classic 1982. And then there are the others that we drink until the vintages are ready to drink. We all win. Now on to the Loire Valley, which features the longest and most famous river in France. Many great civilizations traveled the Loire, and royalty built their summer retreats along its banks. It's not always as well known for wines such as Bordeaux or Burgundy, but this is probably because over half of the wines coming from the Loire are white. Only 1/4 are red, and many of the whites are not aged in new French oak. The Loire region, or appellation, begins on the west coast of France, on the Atlantic Ocean, and stretches inland for about 600 miles, or 1,000 kilometers. The Muscadet wine region is centered around the city of Nantes, near where the Loire meets the Atlantic. The climate there is moist and temperate, with mild summers, mild winters, and good soil for Muscadet. Another name for this grape is Melon de Bourgogne, and it's probably traveled there from Burgundy. Muscadet is a light-bodied, quite crisp and clean white wine with lemony notes and a hint of brininess. That's from the terroir of the Atlantic Ocean. Perhaps the most famous wine from the region is Muscadet, Sèvres, and Maine-sur-Lys, which comes from a region a little inland and southeast from Nantes. Sur-Lys means on Lys. Now, remember in Lecture 7, when we were speaking about autolysis and lees aging, the same thing applies here. Wines sur lis are those that spent the winter on its lees, which are that dead yeast cells and sediment. And this gives the wine more richness and weight, but also gives it that biscuity, yeasty type of tone. The food in this region is very much seafood based, as you might imagine. It's likely why this region has not changed styles for centuries. It's absolutely one of the best wines to pair with oysters, shellfish, and other light seafood fare. Its high acidity and delicate flavor, especially if you have those yeasty tones from the sur-lis, really allow the flavors of the seafood to pop in your mouth. But more on that in Lecture 24. The central vineyards of the Loire are the farthest inland, and that's where the most famous of the white wines from this region come from, Sancerre and Puy-Fumé. Remember, Sancerre was the wine that gave me my wine epiphany, and it just might for you too. The climate here, though, is a bit more continental, which means it gets a bit more extreme in its temperatures, hot summers and severe winters. Unlike with Muscadet, frost is often an issue here. The soil is chalky and stony, rich in those marine fossils that we talked about, and these wines do indeed have incredible finesse. They do make red Sancerre, but most Sancerre is white and comes from Sauvignon Blanc. As we discussed in Lecture 5, Sauvignon Blanc is known for its high acidity and intense aromas. So let's taste our Sancerre. Notice the pale color. We noticed the pale straw color as we saw last time, and it has some light greenish hue to it. Now let's smell the Sancerre. Now again, you get those lemon notes, that citrus quality, and gooseberries and quince. Now again, if you don't have the Lunet de Vin set, you can go to a specialty food market to pick up these just to really get that flavor. Now let's taste it. Again, you get those strong mineral tones, but also that fresh cut grass that is so known for Sauvignon Blanc. Now, there is one aroma that identifies Sancerre, and it's going to sound weird, but it's cat's pee on a gooseberry bush. And if you see a lot of British writing, you'll see this as their descriptor for Sancerre. Now, it sounds terrible, but actually it's what it's come to be known for. Now, the taste of the Sauvignon Blanc, the Sancerre, is quite delicate and light-bodied, especially versus the white Bordeaux that we had. You get that crisp acid, and that it's always bright and cleansing towards the finish. Now, Pouilly Fumé is also made from Sauvignon Blanc, and although they have similar soils, the terroir is slightly different. I always remember the distinction because fumé means smoke in French, and the wine can have a smoky mineral taste reminiscent of gunflint. Many of the wines here see old oak, so some of the herbaceousness is curbed a bit. Between the coastal regions of Muscadet and the inland region of the central vineyards are the regions of Anjou-Saumur and Touraine, which produce both whites and reds. The coolest thing about these regions is the soil, which is called tuffeau, a more porous version of the limestone calcareous chalk I referred to earlier. As a result, it has a better drainage, and that's good for particular grapes. If and when you travel to this region, you may think that the people who live there are total cave dwellers, as their cellars and even sometimes their hotels and restaurants are carved into the very tuffeau, the very soil itself. The whites in this region are made from a grape called Chenin Blanc. From this single grape comes a wide variety of wine styles, from light, slightly sweet, and sometimes effervescent Vouvray, to the dry, rich, full-bodied, and oaked wines of Savinière. The latter have the characteristic flavor of bruised apples, or decadently sweet sometimes, as is the case with botrytized Chenin Blanc from Coeur de Chaume. Chenin Blanc can do it all. Now, let's taste the Chenin Blanc. We have here a Vouvray. Now let's pick up the Sancerre and look at the color difference here. Chenin Blanc is a little bit deeper than the paler Sauvignon Blanc. And it's not as aromatic as Sauvignon Blanc. You really have to stick your nose in the glass there a little bit. And the fruit is not as lemony, it's more towards the apple kind of family. And you see fresh quince here. And again, you probably need to go find one of those to know what I'm talking about. But there's one benchmark aroma that you get from Chenin Blanc, and that's wet wool. Do you ever remember wearing your favorite wool sweater in the winter? And perhaps you walked outside and had snow on it and came back inside and you remember smelling that wet wool. But that's one of the benchmark aromas for Chenin Blanc. Again, not a bad thing, it just identifies it. Now let's taste it. The particular Vouvray that I have here is off-dry, so it is slightly sweet. But Chenin Blanc tends to be weightier than Sauvignon Blanc. And the acid is not as high, but it's still quite balanced and good. Now, the red wines from this area, and particularly from Chinon and Bourgogne, are well known for their Cabernet Franc, which loves the soil. Remember from Lecture 6 that Cabernet Franc is the father to Cabernet Sauvignon. I mean, it doesn't have the intensity of Cabernet Sauvignon tannins, and it has somewhat lived in the shadow of its son. Almost always you see Cabernet Franc blended with other grape varieties, but here you see it by itself. Now, if you have a Chinon or Bourgogne, or even an Anjou or Touraine Rouge, go through the 5 S's. If you notice, and even if you pick up your left bank Bordeaux wine and you compare it, now notice the color difference. The Chinon or Cabernet Franc is much, much paler than the Cabernet Sauvignon. And you can totally see your fingers through it. One of the other reasons that is because it's unoaked. Sometimes oak fixes color and can make it more opaque. But this is actually clear. Let's smell it. You get some strong raspberry tones, but a little hint of black currant, because you get a little leafy greenness in there, but it's nowhere near as strong as Cabernet Sauvignon. On the palate, for a red, it's relatively light-bodied, and it's definitely unoaked, but you do get those lovely fruit flavors. And the tannins are only slightly gripping, but this is a very easygoing wine. Now, when I traveled to Chinon, I went to grab a bite at this local place, and I saw these local workers who had just been pruning, just sitting around. Now, they were drinking Chinon in water glasses, and it was wonderful to be able to see this because they were just having it with their charcuterie, and it was wonderful just to sit there and have a casual glass of red wine. It really helped me realize that it doesn't always have to be really high and sophisticated, because they were drinking it just with their lunch. And it just made me think that wine can be so much fun. Now, in our next lecture, we'll travel to eastern France, to Burgundy and Alsace. You'll need the following wines for this lecture: a Chablis-Syrah, which we've seen before, a Meursault, or any white Burgundy from the Côte de Beaune, a Gevrey-Chambertin, or any red Burgundy from the Côte d'Or, a Beaujolais, either Beaujolais Nouveau, Beaujolais Village, or a Cru of Beaujolais, and finally an Alsace Gewürztraminer, or an Alsace Pinot Gris. These wines are power refined and made elegant. One of them is from my favorite region, bar none. And until then, bonne chance et à bientôt.